Hi, in this video we'll explore how to use text files in your programs. So far, you know how to use variables and arrays to temporarily store data. However, most data that programmers use in the real world is stored externally in files and databases. This lesson begins your journey into incorporating external data into a program. This is a fundamental concept in computer science, and it is often called file I/O. In this lesson, you'll continue to work with the Fitbit dataset that you analyzed earlier in this module. In your analysis, you developed an algorithm to analyze the Fitbit dataset to answer the question, how many days did each participant reach or exceed the goal of 30 active minutes per day? While writing this algorithm, you may have already been wondering, how can I write a program that executes this algorithm? You already know how to do most of this, such as use an if statement to determine if the sum is greater than or equal to 30, or use a loop through the data, or use a variable to keep track of the number of active days. The main thing that is missing from this algorithm is how to get all of this data into the program. Right now, the Fitbit data is in a spreadsheet file that is saved on a computer. So how do you get it from the computer into the program? To answer this question, let's review something you learned about a while ago, files. As a reminder, each class is contained in its own file. For example, this program has a triangle.java file that stores the code for the triangle class, and a trianglerunner.java class, which contains all the code for the trianglerunner class, which houses the main method. Notice how both these files end with .java. The .java extension tells the computer that these files contain Java code. In addition to these program files, you have also worked with the investigate.txt file to document your reflections as you explore programs. You may have noticed that this file has a different extension, .text. The .text extension tells the computer that this file contains plain text instead of code. Going back to our Fitbit analysis, we can add a fitbit.txt file. This file can store data. In this program, this fitbit.txt file stores all the data from the Fitbit data spreadsheet. This brings up an important new way to think about files in our program. A file is storage for data that persists when the program is not running. Unlike variables, which are created when the program runs, this data exists apart from the actual program. So now there is a file that stores all the data, which is great. But how do you get it from the fitbit.txt file into the main program to analyze it? In Java, there are tools that enable you to retrieve the data from a file while your program executes. Let's step away from our Fitbit dataset for a moment to focus on a simpler example. Here, we have a program with two files, a haiku.txt file that has 3 lines of text, and a readFileRunner.java file that will contain all the code for the program. Let's walk through the steps for reading in the haiku.txt file into the Java file. First, you will use the file and scanner classes to connect a file to a program. Step 1. The first step is to create a file object and pass in the name of the file as the argument. The file path argument must match the name of the text file exactly. File, quantity, string name is the file constructor. It accepts a file name to open for reading. Step 2. Create a scanner object that accepts a file object to read. Notice that the way we create a scanner object here is almost exactly the same as when you want to read input from the keyboard, but instead of passing in system.in, you pass in the file object as an argument. Step 3. Use a while loop to loop through all the lines in the file. You could technically use a for loop, but many times you will not know the exact number of lines the data file has. For the while loop condition, use input.hasNext. The hasNext method returns true if there is a next item to read in a file. Because hasNext is an instance method of the scanner class, you need to use dot notation with the scanner object. Step 4 is to add code to the while loop to read in each line of data. You can also include code to analyze the data, but for right now let's focus on just reading in each line. Just like when you get string input from the user, you can use the nextLine method to get the next line of the file as a string. Then, we can print the line to the console. Let's trace through this program. You create a file and scanner object to read in the file named haiku.txt. You enter the while loop. The program starts at the top of the text file, so the condition is true because there are more lines in the file. The nextLine method returns the first line of the text file, retrieving data, which is assigned to the variable line, and printed to the console. Back to the while loop condition, which is still true because there are more lines in the file, line now has the value of the nextLine method, the next line in the file from a file picking flowers, which is printed to the console. Back to the while loop condition, there is another line, so this is true. Line is assigned the value of the next line, which is beautiful bouquet, which is printed to the console. Back to the while loop condition. This time, input.hasNext returns false because there are no more lines in the text file. The program exits the while loop and ends. So there you have it, the basic structure of reading a file into a program. However, there are just a few more things that need to be added to make this program work. First is the input.close method. You should use this method when you are done reading a file. This closes the scanner object, which frees up memory and external resources. Then, you need to import the scanner class, which is part of the java.util package, and the file class, which is part of the java.io package. Additionally, in Java, when using the file class, you have to include what to do if the file with the provided name cannot be opened. Without adding this to the program, an unreported exception error will occur. To avoid this error, you can add throws IO exception to the header of the method that uses the file. Adding throws IO exception to the method header tells the method to terminate the program and throw an error if the file name is invalid. To use throws IO exception, you need to import the IO exception class, which is part of the java.io package. Now that you know the basics of reading a file in Java, it's your turn to give it a try.